The HADZABE, let me tell you something else about the HADZABE. The HADZABE tribe are adapted in male and female different to other tribes. The female microbiome is adapted to be more plant-based, and that's even in the children. It's not something, it's generationally happening, it's a genetic thing. And that's because the men predominantly eat meat, because they go hunting, whereas the women stay home and they dig for starch and other tubers. And they ground up baobab seeds and make certain porridges from it. They eat predominantly plants. The women still eat meat and honey, but mostly they're eating plants. They're at home with the kids digging and eating that way. And the women's microbiomes are more adapted to plant-based and the men to meat. So that shows you after hundreds of thousands of years of living the way they did, there's adaptations in there. And that's why when you look today on the planet, there are a lot of people who are reacting badly to a plant-based diet because you're asking a body to adapt like that after thousands of years of genetic adaptation to something different. And this has to be taken into account. And just because it's working for one person and science says it can work for everybody, then there are other aspects of science that would disagree. For instance, that proves something very important. I mean, both can survive on tubers, and the HADZABE's diet's 7 times higher in fibre than our own standard Western diet. But it shows you something very important. This ancient tribe, who has been unchanged for 100,000 years at least, have a different adaptation in their stomachs to how they're going to digest food. And on the vegan side, they need to loosen up and accept that restoring this planet needs to involve animals. It's as simple as that. You're not going to restore the planet by simply growing crops, and you're not going to create permaculture food forests without using animals to do it. And I only come in this as neutral just to say that's a good opening philosophical idea for everyone. They can learn from hunter-gatherer tribes.
Soldier on, my good countrymen, keep fighting for your children now, keep fighting for your land.
Hey guys, I thought I would revisit the topic from a neutral stance of the current persistent conflict online regarding diet. Now admittedly it's perhaps going to seem a little hypocritical to try and come at it from a neutral view, because for years I was always coming at it from the vegan side of things, and I still completely oppose factory farming and the conditions we keep those beings in, and it's wrong. But living where I live, which is in the bush of East Africa, this is my home, I'm literally outside my home, and spending the time that I spend with more indigenous persons on the planet, tribes, etc., and spending time in an undeveloped country. You know, it's not that developed here, so there are still a lot of things to be learned from persons from developed countries from that. I think I can bring a neutral view, and I think one of the things I was thinking about is how much veganism could learn from a tribe that I know called the Hadza, or the HADZABE. But at the same time, also why there must be a neutral dialect from people who are pursuing the Paleo ideology, or the carnivorous ideology, and that ties into my time with the tribes here as well. Now, let me say that the tribes vary in how they live. Now, the HADZABE are the last of the planet's true hunter-gatherers. There are only 300 who are truly living the original life, which means they literally just live in the bush, and they do not keep animals, they do not grow food, they hunt and they gather, and that's all they eat every day, or that's what they don't eat every day. The interesting thing about the HADZABE is they don't eat every day most of the time. So I'll get onto the HADZABE shortly, but not far from where I am, there are the home centre of a tribe, which a lot of that tribe work here, called the Chaga. And the Chaga existed predominantly on banana from the tree, green banana that you boil, and avocado. They used to use cows for milk, but it became very treacherous for them because the Maasai religion states all cows belong to the Maasai. So they even had to dig underground caves, the Chaga tribe, to hide from the Maasai, because the Maasai was so ferocious in comparison to these other tribes. Remembering, Maasai moved into Tanzania, they weren't persistently indigenous like the Chaga and the Hadzabe. And of course then I have the Maasai, who live on, due to geographical location, they use cows and goats, and they live on traditionally milk, meat and blood, but the tribe I'm part of welcome access to plant foods because they see the benefit in it. Now let me break this all down so you can understand what I'm wanting to get at here, because I prefer to come at things from a philosophical approach these days instead of an emotional attachment to one side of the argument or the other, because I've never been productive by having an emotional attachment to one side of the argument. By being neutral and centered in my emotions, I've been productive in life, and prior to that I was not. So what can veganism and the vegan movement learn from the Hadzabe? So let me tell you about the Hadzabe. The Hadzabe are only 300 in number, as I say. They live in one of the harshest environments on earth. They are bow hunters, and they also have very strong symbiotic relationships with animals. The most noted is the honeybird. The honeybird, and they exchange songs, and the honeybird will literally lead them to honey supplies, to a beehive, where it knows that if it leads the Hadzabe to the beehive, they'll destroy the hive, take the honey, and the leftovers the honeybird will get for itself, whereas it wouldn't be able to do that without them. Likewise, they wouldn't be able to find half as much honey at all without it. And out of interest, the largest calorie source in the bush is honey, and the larvae inside the comb as well. It far exceeds the calorie density, caloric density of meat, and it makes up more than 20% of the Hadzabe's diet. It's the most prized thing for them. So the Hadzabe are stoned constantly. They wake up and they get stoned straight away. That's how they start their day. They smoke weed, natural weed from the bush, but it does still get you stoned. It's still not as strong as hydroponic stuff in the West, but it still gets you battered. And this is their life. They wake up, they get stoned, they go hunting, they go gathering. The men hunt with bows, as I say, and sometimes with spears and clubs, etc. But predominantly they bow hunt, and they use poisoned arrows for that. Their favourite meat is baboon, which is a bit weird to see them cooking baboons because it looks so human-like, but it's their most, it's the delicacy for them, aside from the honey. But here's the interesting thing about them as well, I find fascinating. There's no concept in the tribe or word or dialect for worry. They don't worry. Nobody worries in the tribe, which is just amazing. You know, truly phenomenal. And they shatter the Western illusion that we have about hunter-gathering. We have an illusion that the alpha, the strong male, is the one who hunts all the animals and gets all the women. It's just a lie and a fallacy. The tribes here survive on community and community alone. Hadzabe community has no leader, and this is true of all hunter-gatherer tribes. Leaders only came about due to farming, but I'll get onto that. And they make decisions as a group, including the children, because they say the perspective of a woman and a child and a man are also different. It's important that they hear every perspective. So they rely on community because together they are strong. And the Maasai are the same as that, as the Maasai say, no matter how brave a man is, always remember 2 brave men are better. And this is absolutely true. 2 brave men are way better than 1. And it's the same with 1 brave savage man is not welcome in the tribe. And strength and savagery plays no role whatsoever in the primal world at all. It's a complete fallacy of the internet, and it annoys me when I see people pursuing that idea because it's just not true. Community and love is what founds and bonds these tribes. If you've got someone who's savage and irate and unpredictable, likelihood is the tribe will excommunicate or kill them. literally, because it'll jeopardize the procreation of the tribe. It'll jeopardize the children to have a volatile person in amongst them. So it's not favoured at all. And the hunter-gatherers, though, to stick with that, they rely on community, and there's no leader. Everything's done as a community. They have no concept for worry. It might be because they're stoned all the time, I don't know, but they just don't have a concept for it, which is quite profound and powerful. Their settlements, they move constantly. You literally can't tell where they've been. They leave no mark on the land whatsoever. So they are probably more environmentally friendly. If you take away the side of animal welfare and animal rights, they are more environmentally friendly than any farming person by far. They have less impact. So what can we learn from that? Well, as a vegan, I had beekeeping on this land when I first came here, and I moved the bees to live in the wild in the forest that I've just taken over protection of, as you've seen in the recent video. We've got a massive 7-kilometre valley filled with forest and wildlife that we're going to start protecting and growing food. And I moved them down there to live a natural life because they were stinging my dogs and ourselves and so on. But I really also was quite against beekeeping. Now, something new has happened to me. And I think what the HADZABE can teach us is that people who hunt and eat meat can actually be better for the environment than Westerners farming. But the problem you have is there's no natural habitat to do that anymore. There's also not enough natural habitat for everyone to live that way. But what it does bring up the question is the best thing for the environment to exclude the use of animals completely as a vegan? And I would say, based on the fact that in nature there's no ecosystems without animals in them, then if you really study it beyond the simple fact of animal welfare, then you'll realise that by saying there should be no use of animals at all in any of our farming, you're actually going to harm the planet more. You're going to harm more species as well. And that's because every ecosystem relies upon animal input in some which way, shape or form, from the smallest to the biggest. You know, you need grazing animals to turn up the dirt to attract insect life, which in turn attracts more wildflowers, which in turn gives more habitat for bees, and we all know the benefit bees have. And it's such a huge interwoven thing that we humans barely understand. So with this valley, I need a way to protect it from people going down there to quarry. Now, we'll use Maasai. The Maasai tribes are very poor, so to give them opportunities to work as security, which is what they're good at, is very good for the tribe and for their children, etc., to access medical care. I've had a lot of people asking me, do the Maasai live short lives? They do live shorter lives than most, but it's got nothing to do with their diet, because I know Maasai women I know more Maasai over 100 than any other tribe here. But the reason being is where they live, the water is a massive problem. All my Maasai friends knock a tooth out of their children, and so when your jaw locks with lockjaw from cholera, they can get medicine into your mouth. So the most ancient life insurance policy ever. It gives you an idea of the harsh habitat they live in. It's not like the West. You can't compare life expectancy here to the West. There's so many other factors like medical care, sanitation, water. So I hope you all heard that. We're attracting so much bird life here at the moment. Wonderful. So the Maasai will potentially be security to help us with the forest, to stop people quarrying, etc. Of course, we've fenced off the roads already. But the other thing I need to do is to give the local persons an advantage to protect it. So my immediate reaction is, by the specialists here, is to put beehives, and many. You're talking 500 swarms, 500 hives, 500 swarms, 500 colonies at least, to stretch up this valley. Now what that'll do is we will harvest honey, but and we don't pull wings off bees here, it's all natural. It'll benefit the forest for pollination, but the locals will benefit it because the locals won't come in and start cutting down trees and in the way that they are to earn a bit of money, because they are getting some money from the honey. There's a subsidy there. And also when they see other people doing it, they'll stop them and say, hey, we need this to be in good nick so as I can get the money from this honey later in the year. money from honey. But anyway, this is why I realized that we have to start looking at the fact that the philosophy of veganism is a bit broken in the West, and I'm totally for the abolishment of animal agriculture in its current form, without a doubt. But I can protect that forest by using a form of animal agriculture, beekeeping. And this is the way the world is. You're not going to get everyone tomorrow to just say, okay, I'll protect that forest, for example. You have to give them a reason. And if you give them a set of beehives that belong to them and their neighbours, then it's not going to cost us very little, and then they become your security for the forest. And the same thing is done in Uganda. The locals are paid subsidies on the boundaries of windy, impenetrable forest to tell the government when guerrillas are leaving, or when they see people going in that they don't know, or they see someone cutting down trees, etc. So as the people become the protection. So there's a thing there in itself that can start making us to have different ideas. Now, I've mentioned Alan Savory's work. Alan Savory, very strange character, did kill 4,000 elephants by mistake because he thought they were a problem, and they weren't. But such is the horrendous way of ecology. And unfortunately that happened, but still the use of cattle is just common sense. If you go to Serengeti for the migration, they bunch together on the best grass, the volcanic grass, and they stand and turn it all up, and they poop so much they can't eat there anymore, so they move on. And the reason they're bunched together is because they're scared of predators. Whereas the locals who walk their cows around, they never bunch together, so they're just slowly over generations decimating the environment. So if you can bunch them together by using electric fences or a false predatory presence, you do restore the ground. And people try to debunk it all the time, but I've actually seen it work. You know, I've physically seen it, and I'm going to do it here. The Maasai keep many cows, and they've given me a cow recently, and goats, and we don't have to slaughter them, but we could keep dairy goats and dairy cows. And I will do this in practice here. We'll bunch them together on the land and show people, you know, show the world that it can be done in a very clear-cut way. Because I've seen it work, so I know it can be replicated. I'm not saying it works every time, but this is trial and error. We're trying to restore a dying planet here. So that's the first thing I would say you can learn as a vegan, is sometimes the consumption of animals or the incorporation of animals inside an ecosystem benefit the planet. They don't necessarily, it's not outright all use of animals destroys the planet, and we have to realize that, you know, it has to be seen that way. Now the next problem you've got is that humanity is trying these days on the Paleo movement, everyone's trying to live hunter-gatherer. Well, you have a problem there because there's no ecosystem for that. But the second problem arises when you look at the fact that we had the Paleolithic era where we were hunter-gatherers, but the first towns, we lived in towns as hunter-gatherers in Syria. The first town ever discovered, the oldest town discovered, is a hunter-gatherer town. There was no animal husbandry, there was no farming. We were just staying in a community together. There was no public spaces. The houses were just all on top of each other. Then we'd go out and hunt and come back. But the world could sustain it at that point. But eventually it couldn't sustain it anymore. And due to changes in weather, we moved to the Neolithic times. And that meant we started farming. Now what you have to understand is we owe all our development to farming pretty much. Because when people no longer needed to be hunting all the time, and building tools for hunting and so on, and gathering, they found an opportunity to develop. But they also then started storing food. The first animal husbandry was dogs. 12,000 years ago, the most early discovery of a grave, they buried someone with their dog, and they were holding and hugging the dog in the grave, so they knew dogs meant a lot to them. There's a great movie called Alpha. It tells you about the start of man becoming, it's just an idea, of course, the idea of man and dog bonding. But this started the animal husbandry idea as well. But actually that gave way to new problems, because you had all of a sudden farming, and people were farming. Then people realized they didn't have to farm. They could build tools and exchange it for the food that was being grown. People realized they didn't need to hunt. They could eat the farmed foods. People realized they could keep animals. But then that meant that it got to the point where territories were becoming scarce because populations were booming, because of farming, you could have many, many children because you knew I've got enough food. Whereas if you're nomadic hunter-gatherer, you've got to carry your children. You couldn't just bang out 7 or 8 or 9 children. When you were farming, you could. So this meant that land started getting tight, and it also meant that we started having leaders, hierarchies, because prior to that, tribes had no hierarchy. So hierarchy begins to keep the peace with regards to who owns what and who does what. And then on top of that, because of land issues, we start with war. And actually the very first recorded word for war in the human history is a desire for more livestock. That's the first word used in recorded records for war, actually translate to a desire for more livestock. So it was farming that gave birth to the fact that we have society we have today, leaderships, etc. And it was farming that gave birth to the arts and music as well, because we had more free time to express these things. And it was farming that gave birth to bigger families as well. But then the problem we have is to live like Paleo and ignore the Neo means that we skip an aspect of our development. It's likewise saying that we should live on raw food and ignoring the countless hundreds of thousands of years use of fire to develop and change our intestinal tract, etc., should not be ignored. So I'm not saying this to say don't do this, don't do this. All I'm saying is there has to be a dialect, because you can't just say I'm going to eat hunter-gatherer and then not come up with a solution for the way that we are producing those animals for that. Likewise with veganism, eating meat has been part of human life for so long, hundreds of thousands of years. Veganism is brand new, so vegans need to be patient for the change that they hope to see, however that change comes. But they also need to be have some movement as well. You can genuinely, for environmental purposes, of course it makes sense to reduce the input and the demand on the current factory farming systems for animals. But it doesn't have to be a complete abolishment of it. It could be a changing of the systems. And yes, the animals will suffer, but it's true that unfortunately on this planet, suffering is happening, and it happens. You know, the Buddha's idea was to ignore it in a way. But living out here in a state of survival for many people, then you see horrendous suffering in nature. But at least we're conscious of it, you know, we can make a moral decision regarding it. So there are two things there that we can learn. One is that the HADZABE, let me tell you something else about the HADZABE. The HADZABE tribe are adapted in male and female different to other tribes. The female microbiome is adapted to be more plant-based, and that's even in the children. It's not something, it's generationally happening, it's a genetic thing. And that's because the men predominantly eat meat, because they go hunting, whereas the women stay home and they dig for starch and other tubers. And they ground up baobab seeds and make certain porridges from it. They eat predominantly plants. The women still eat meat and honey, but mostly they're eating plants. They're at home with the kids digging and eating that way. And the women's microbiomes are more adapted to plant-based and the men to meat. So that shows you after hundreds of thousands of years of living the way they did, there's adaptations in there. And that's why when you look today on the planet, there are a lot of people who are reacting badly to a plant-based diet because you're asking a body to adapt like that after thousands of years of genetic adaptation to something different. And this has to be taken into account. And just because it's working for one person and science says it can work for everybody, then there are other aspects of science that would disagree. For instance, that proves something very important. I mean, both can survive on tubers, and the HADZABE's diet's 7 times higher in fibre than our own standard Western diet. But it shows you something very important. This ancient tribe, who has been unchanged for 100,000 years at least, have a different adaptation in their stomachs to how they're going to digest food. And what a lot we can learn from hunter-gatherer tribes in that sense as well. But if we're going to learn from them in the sense of how we're going to eat today, then to live like a hunter-gatherer from factory farmed meat is not the same. First of all, factory farmed meat is very fatty, unbelievably so, compared to the lean meats they eat out in the bush. But regarding habitat, the destruction must be had that since Paleo we became Neo. That Neolithic is how the world developed to what it is today. So to try and eliminate that from the equation doesn't work, so there needs to be a discussion. If everybody wanted to eat paleo, animal rights aside, if people want to do that, then they have to come up with a solution for how they're going to farm those animals without destroying the planet. And they also have to come up with a reasonable solution to the fact that there's not enough space for everybody to eat that way at the moment, which means they have to start getting to work on the environmental side, which is regreening, reforesting, and doing the sort of things that we are doing at the moment. And on the vegan side, they need to loosen up and accept that restoring this planet needs to involve animals. It's as simple as that. You're not going to restore the planet by simply growing crops, and you're not going to create permaculture food forests without using animals to do it. And I only come in this as neutral just to say that's a good opening philosophical idea for everyone. They can learn from hunter-gatherer tribes, because there is much to be learned from them. Really a great deal to be learned from them. And there are so few left on the planet. I'm privileged that I'm here. When I can run again, once I get over this sickness with the Lyme and Babesia, I have arrangements to go out with the HADZABE, the last original HADZABE, the 300 remaining, and join them for a week in the bush and go on a persistence hunt with them. The hunt will go on with or without me, but I thought I can keep up with them. When I'm in training, I know I can keep up with the distances they run. And I thought it's something rare for the world to see would be someone with a GoPro strapped to their head joining these men on a hunt that your ancestors were involved with. And I want to connect with that to see. You know, I want to see where we came from and see how I can bring that forward into our present day systems and get a full understanding, as I am through the Maasai, of how we can integrate a traditional natural man way of life with a spiritual way of life, but integrated in a way where Mother Earth is protected but also is still our industry and restored as we do it. And that's exactly what I'm working on. And I feel the more I've learned from the Maasai, the better it's been for me, because I've let go of my egoic attachments to certain ideas, certainly in my geographical climate, where I can start looking at ways to develop and grow on the resources God has provided us, such as the food forest and using beekeeping to keep people off it, such as using dairy goats, etc. So I've got ways to bottle feed my sick puppies in the animal rescue, and ways to make raw kefir for the children here. Raw kefir is a very common thing used around here, and I have to make use of what's available to me in this geographical location. And when I had a very set vegan mindset, I really wasn't moving freely with it. I would pause and say, oh, I can't use bees, it's not fair. And I realized that it's not an ideal world that we live in. And I think it's a completely different paradigm where I am to the West, but I still think some of the things that my consciousness are waking up to here should be gently coerced into the movements in the West, because then we can start looking at things more rationally. I mean, if you can get everyone to be healthy on a predominantly plant-based diet and take the demand off the current animal agriculture systems and still let them have their odd animal product, you're still going to reduce suffering, you're still going to protect the environment, and you're going to do it in a faster way, more than likely. And that's very important, because time, the clock is ticking. And unfortunately, the paleo movement are not speaking a great deal about environmental aspect, and the vegan movement speak a lot about it, but they are not generating a lot of solutions. Veganic farming, etc. is coming up, but there's like 7 in England, veganic farms, and they're very small, so it's not there yet. And predominantly it's becoming online, at least where my voice is heard. I really feel like it's just becoming trying to win an argument over winning an argument instead of having solutions presented, you know. I'd love to see all the online vegan YouTubers get together, do some fundraising with the audience that they have, and channel that money into buying some land as a cooperative, and proving that you can do veganic farming, and proving, you know, that they did this and this and this, and getting some practical living solutions, because people really do speak louder with actions than words, I found in life. My voice didn't travel very far with people I met at all until I built this village and rescued all these animals, and found a safe place for all these children, and became a Maasai and got thousands of children out of labour. Somehow just the fact that my actions were there, not boasting, but it just gives some validity to your voice. And I've noticed that more people want to listen to me because they say, well, if you've done that, you must know something, or at least if you've fumbled your way through it, which I feel like I have, you must have learned something. And I think if we can start looking at things that way, you know, instead of just protesting slaughterhouses, which should be done, the animal cruelty in there is horrific. But maybe we can show new ways, you know, like new working models for farmers, to say, hey, look, we've built this veganic farm using this money and this charity that we set up, and look what it's done. And you could do the same on some of your land too. And even the vegan movement is so passionate that instead of all the vegans wasting their money on vegan chocolate bars and vegan Ben & Jerry's, they've donated it every month so as we can help a farmer to set up with veganic farming on one area of their land as another working example to show the world a new way. And this is things to look at, but I guarantee that your veganic farms should have some livestock walking over it. Even if they are rescue beings, you should use them, because it helps, you know. And I'm learning this now. I see the necessity, because there's not an ecosystem absent of animals anywhere on the planet. So, right, just a bit of a gentle video to plant some ideas and hopefully alter some consciousness out there, as mine has been altered, living a truly connected life in nature as I do here. I mean, this is why I'm sitting here. Literally, I'll show you. This is my office and where I've been recovering from Lyme, and this is a stream. Now, rainy season's just kicking off here, but I've got some footage of this stream the other day, so it really shows you, I'll pop it in now, it shows you how close to nature we live here, you know. Nature is boss for us in this place, and we are just guests, and it's very apparent to me in everything I do, whereas back in the West it wasn't so apparent, but I did spend a lot of time in nature still. But it's very hard, and I think I can bring a deeper connection because of that. And I know people are growing their own food, they have allotments and things like that, and that brings a good connection as well. So if you can get involved in cooperatives like that, that's great also. But for me here, I have a connection to something which most don't, and that is tribal life that hasn't changed for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's just on my doorstep, you know. I can drive out in the bush now and I'll bump into them, potentially, because they're like ghosts. The HADZABE are anyway. Maasai I'll see, but the HADZABE are like ghosts, they're hard to find. So, but anyway, I just want to put that out into the internet consciousness, as it were. So, as you can see, I'm trying now to be more neutral, because I see the error in my approaches in the past, because I don't think arguing and making people feel guilty is the fastest way to bring about protection of this planet. And that's what I want, because I'm here and I can see it happening quickly. You know, I was invited to join the Elephant Round Table, the protection agency to protect elephant in East Africa. And if it wasn't for some of the things that are going on at the moment, with regards to input from the West and from government funding here as well, the world very little knows that in 10 years East African elephant would be extinct. You know, I can see it. It's here. It's coming. It's like we're on the brink of Mad Max. And unless humans can get centered and mature and stop trying to win arguments and start coming up with solutions, then I think we are set on a course of destruction that won't be averted. So instead of just arguing and arguing and arguing, let's accept people have differences, and let's try to find solutions, and let's try to find working examples. And that's now my approach in what I'm doing. So, okay. God bless, guys. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, as it really helps us to grow the channel and with it help more children here in Tanzania. Also, don't forget you can support our work by sharing with children in crisis here, be it sharing for a particular need or even sharing one-on-one support for education, housing, food and medical care. It can be done for as little as the cost of a cup of coffee a week back in the West after all. Just visit www.sharetanzania.co.uk to find out more. Lastly, remember you can also support us via Patreon, www.patreon.com/featherstail, and help keep us here in Tanzania to continue our work. The links for the website and for the Patreon are in the description box of this video. Love and light, guys. See you soon.